Hello, Mike here, and in this short video we're going to talk about a weird thing called Simpsons paradox. And it's based on what happens when you watch too much of The Simpsons. You just binge on it over the weekend, you watch too much Simpsons, and suddenly everyone's yellow. It's not that. It's actually something different. You knew I was being there. And it's when you compare stuff. So you can compare things overall, or if you have a categorical variable that you can break it down by, you can compare things based on different subgroups. And Simpsons paradox is when the overall comparison differs from the subgroup comparison. And what we mean by that is there's a famous case from Berkeley from the 1970s. It's a little university out on the West Coast. And they were looking at graduate school admission rates. And overall, if you look over here, 19% of the women applicants were admitted, 28% of the male applicants were admitted. So you think immediately, something goofy is going on. Now, if you look not overall, but by department, we call that subject here, probably should say department. But if we look by department, Department 1, it's 15% versus 14%, women versus men. For Department 2, it's 51% versus 50. You're like, whoa, two departments there, more women than men got admitted. Overall, it's different. So this is called the Simpsons paradox, when overall you get one view of what's going on with the world. When you start looking at it by subgroups, it reverses, and it's a different view of the world. I call it a math trick. It's just how you're looking at your data. You're looking at it overall or by subgroups. And you want to be just careful when you do data analysis. You want what kind of story you're trying to tell, and do you want to look overall or by subgroup? So it's an important item to keep in mind when you're dealing with categorical data, when you're looking at subgroups, that this can happen. Another famous example has to do with treating kidney stones. And which treatment would you prefer for your kidney stone? Someone says, oh, we have two treatments at our hospital. We have treatment A and treatment B. If you look at the overall rate, you might say, oh, treatment B is a lot better than treatment A, or at least 5% better. Treatment B is the one I want. Now, what if they broke it down by another variable called stone size? How big is the stone size? Now, if you look overall, if it's a small stone, treatment A is better. If it's a large stone, treatment A is better. And yet, overall, when you combine the data, treatment B looks better. That's called a paradox, because it changes. So we find treatment A to be better than treatment B when we look at type of stone. What's exactly happening here? The size of the stone is called a confounding variable. It's a hidden variable. It's changing how we look at the world here. Treatment A is primarily applied to larger stones. Look at the sample size here. Treatment B is primarily applied to the smaller stones. Look at sample size here. But in most scenarios, treatment A appears to be better than treatment B. In Table 1, we're comparing apples with oranges. Because one treatment's better for the large stones, one treatment's better for the small stones. We're just comparing apples and oranges. In this table, we're comparing apples and apples. We're comparing same size stone. So, conditional on the fact what kind of stone we have, you can clearly see that A is the better treatment. So again, when you combine stuff, you look at it one way. When you look at subgroup analysis, it's a different way. If you get a different story, that's called Simpsons paradox. And you just want to be aware that that happens. Aggregate data, that's when you combine stuff, might have a different meaning, and it might mislead people. There's a paper, it's a small out of New York called New York Times. I think it's published daily. Treatment B is better than treatment A. It might scream as a headline. Yeah, but there might be other variables you care about. You might go to your doctor and say, I actually care about what size the stone is. So always think, are there other controlling variables that we want to know and that might tell the story of what's going on? So again, Simpsons paradox refers to the reversal of the direction of a comparison or association when data from several groups are combined to form a single group. And clearly, when you combine groups together, you're losing knowledge of that subgroup variable. For the Berkeley admissions data, we're losing knowledge of what department they applied to. For the kidney stone data, we're losing knowledge of the size of the stone. So whenever you combine things together, you're losing information. And so that can be important. Oh, hey, Kevin, you changed some files. That's cool. My good buddy, Kevin. I don't really need to know that right now. And so keep in mind, combining data, you can lose information. Another example, and this is actually a controversial example from just in emergency medicine. The idea is, do you want to helicopter people away from a traffic accident? Very expensive to do. Insurance doesn't cover all of it. And the question is, helicopters definitely save time. If you're in a major urban area, or even if you're out in the country far away from the hospital, helicopters save time. Do they save lives? And so this is actually a research topic that they still look at in emergency medicine. How often do helicopters save lives? So they looked at data, and they said, well, you had 200 people evacuated by helicopter, and 64 out of 200 survived. We had 1,100 evacuated by road, and 260 out of 1,100 survived. You go percentage-wise, 2% of helicopter patients died, but only 24% of the others did. And that seems discouraging. It seems like, well, wait a minute, why do the helicopter evac if it's a higher death rate? But what's going on? When do you send a helicopter out to a traffic accident? When it's a more serious accident, when it's very, very, very bad stuff has happened. And so they're already very injured, and there's a higher, very injured, I don't know if that's correct English, but they're more injured, and they possibly are more likely to die because they're more injured. So conditional on the fact that you're calling the helicopter out, you know it's a more serious accident, you're dealing with sicker people, more injured people. If you break it down by how serious the accident is, you actually can see what the story is. Among victims of serious accidents, this is a variable we care about looking at, the helicopter saves 52% versus 40% if it's road transport. 84% of those transported by helicopter survive versus 80% of those transported by road. So both groups of victims have a higher survival rate when evacuated by helicopter. So again, Simpson's paradox. You combine the data, you get one view of the world. You look at subgroup analysis, you get a better group of the world. Subgroup analysis is a good thing to do. Why do you want to lose information? Why do you want to lose a subgroup variable by combining data? To go back to the famous Berkeley data set, so there's actually a stat paper written about this because this is where the paradox was first really looked at and studied. This is 1973 admissions data for grad school. And when we look at this, 35% of women were admitted, 44% of men were admitted. So at first glance, it definitely looks like there was discrimination going on. But if you look at it by department, you can see that for most departments, more women were admitted than men. The percentage is higher for women. Not more women, but the higher percentage of women were admitted than men were admitted. The confounding variable is the department. Women tend to apply to competitive departments with low rates of admissions, whereas men, because we're silly and we don't want to, not get admitted, we tend to apply to less competitive departments with high rates of admission, both among the qualified applicants. So the University of California, Berkeley departments were not really discriminating against anything. It's just you're looking at women were applying to hard departments where the overall admission rate is low. Men were applying to the easier departments where the overall admission rates were higher. So when you look at subgroup analysis, you see that. When you combine the data, you don't see that whatsoever. There are times when Simpson's paradox does not occur. If the sample sizes are the same, if the subgroup sample sizes are the same, combining them, you're not going to get a Simpson's paradox. When the rates are the same in the subgroups, combining them, yeah, you're not going to get a Simpson's paradox. So it doesn't happen all the time. And it doesn't happen all the time. It's not guaranteed to happen at all. I mean, it's just, it can occur. And it usually occurs because of weird sample size issues. But there are often times when it does not occur. But you just want to be careful and realize that if you don't do subgroup analysis and you're trying to look at the big picture overall, you might get a different result than if you actually did subgroup analysis. Does the department we apply to affect admissions? Yeah, I think so. Does the severity of the accident affect whether people survive? Yeah, I think so. So when you're doing subgroup analysis, if you think that variable is an important variable, you don't want to lose it by combining data. You want to keep it around. So think deeply. Simpson's paradox indicates the importance of understanding the data and its limitations. Critical thinking is always important. Losing information, not a good thing. So whenever possible, subgroup analysis is the best way to go. Thank you. Hope you learned a little bit. Hope you're having a great night. And as always, we'll see you in class.